Good evening, and welcome. I'm glad you've made it here, to your quiet shelter against the dark. Sometimes, the best way to silence the real worries of the day is to listen to a different kind of fear, a safe fear, told in a soft voice. Tonight, we have 3 allegedly true, unsettling stories for you, designed to help you relax and drift away, all told to the soothing sound of steady rain. And as always, there will be no mid-roll ads to break the atmosphere. Before you get too comfortable, if you appreciate what we do here, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. I'm always curious to know where our stories are pushing back the darkness. Let me know in the comments what storm you're listening to tonight, real or imagined. And now, check your doors, settle in deep, and let the sound of the rain be your shield against the silence. Let's listen to what the darkness has to say.
The first report tonight comes from a place where the trees have grown tall enough to forget the sun, and the silence has a life of its own. Our first story is The Silent Path.
My name is Evans. For 30 years, this forest has been my office, my church, my home. I've walked its trails in the burning sun of summer and the deep, silent snows of winter. I know the call of every bird, the track of every animal. I know the way the wind sounds when it moves through the pines versus the way it sounds in the aspens. There are no surprises left for me here, or so I had believed. It was a routine patrol, a long 10-mile hike along the park's northern boundary line, a quiet, forgotten corner of this vast wilderness. I was checking the old stone markers, half buried in moss and thyme, when I saw it. To my left, leading deeper into the oldest part of the woods, was a path. It was not a game trail made by deer, nor a rough track made by hunters. It was a proper path, about 3 feet wide, perfectly cleared of all debris. The earth was packed down hard, as if by centuries of use. And it was not on my map. I've been the senior ranger here for 15 years. Every official trail, every logging road, every forgotten service path is etched into my memory and my maps. This one did not exist. My training, my experience, my common sense all screamed at me to mark its location and turn back, to report it. But I didn't. A strange, quiet curiosity, thick as the forest mist, settled over me. I took a single step onto the path, and the world went silent. Not quiet, silent. The chirping of the squirrels, the distant call of a blue jay, the humming of insects, the whisper of the wind, it all just stopped, as if I had stepped into a room with soundproof walls. All I could hear was the pounding of my own heart and the sound of my breathing. An unnatural silence, a heavy, watchful silence. I took another step, and another, drawn forward against my better judgment. After about 20 yards, I saw the first marker. It was a wooden post, about chest high, driven into the ground next to the path. The wood was dark, ancient, and seemed immune to rot. Carved into its surface was a symbol. It was a stylized figure of a man, but the limbs were too long and thin, and it had too many joints. Its head was tilted at an impossible angle. It was not a warning to keep out. It felt like a marker showing the way. And despite the cold dread coiling in my stomach, I found myself wanting to see where it led.
I walked for what felt like an hour, maybe more. My watch had stopped. The forest itself began to change. The familiar pines and oaks were replaced by towering trees I did not recognize. Their bark was a smooth, dark gray, and their leaves were a deep, almost black green that seemed to drink the light from the sky. The sun, which should have been high overhead, seemed dim, as if viewed through a smoked glass. Time itself felt sluggish here, thick and heavy like the air. Every 20 yards I passed another of those unsettling wooden markers, each one carved with the same thin, multi-jointed figure in a different, impossible pose. They were mile markers on a road to nowhere. The path ended abruptly in a large circular clearing. The grass here was pale and gray. At the exact center of the clearing stood a structure. It was not a cabin or a ruin or anything I could name. It was a low, angular building made of the same dark, ancient wood as the markers. It had no windows, no doors, no roof that I could see, and its angles were all wrong. It seemed to shift and twist the longer I looked at it, a trick of geometry that made my mind ache. It was a building that did not want to be seen correctly. The silence here was absolute, total. I circled the structure, my hand resting on my service knife, though I knew it would be useless. The walls were seamless, smooth. There was no way in. As I completed my circle, I heard it. A sound. Faint at first, coming from within the wooden walls. A slow, rhythmic, dry clicking, like 1,000 tiny, brittle twigs snapping in perfect sequence. It was an organic sound, but it was not the sound of any living thing I knew. As I stood there, listening, a section of the wall in front of me slid open, without a sound, revealing a dark, vertical opening just wide enough for a man to pass through. The clicking was louder from inside, and a strange, powerful compulsion washed over me. Not my own curiosity, but a command. The path had led me here. The journey was not yet over. I had to go inside. The interior was a single, vast, dark space. The air was cold and still. The rhythmic clicking came from all around me. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I saw them. Lining the walls, standing in perfect rows, were dozens of the creatures from the carvings. Tall, thin, with limbs folded at too many joints. They were not made of wood. They looked like giant desiccated insects, frozen in a state of hibernation. Their heads were tilted, as if listening. This was not a building. This was a nest, a hive. In the center of the room was a single small sapling-like version of the creatures, seemingly new, and next to it, an empty space on the floor. I finally understood. The path was not a trail. It was a lure, a trap, designed to lead living things here, into the silence. I tried to turn, to run, but my feet felt heavy, rooted to the floor. A strange stiffness was creeping up my legs. I looked down at my hands. My skin was darkening, hardening, taking on the texture of ancient dark wood. The clicking grew softer, more rhythmic, almost welcoming. I am the new marker. My purpose is to stand here in the cold and the quiet and to warn the next one who feels the pull of the silent path.
But the warning will not be in words. It will be in the tilt of my head, in the unnatural angle of my limbs. The silence is not empty. It is watchful. And the forest is so very, very old.
We leave the ancient woods to their silence and step indoors, into a place crowded with the memories of the dead, where the ticking of 100 clocks is not the most unsettling sound. Our second account is The Inheritance at Hawthorne's Curiosities.
My work is with the dead. Not bodies, but the things they leave behind. I am an appraiser of antiques. I give value to the forgotten objects of forgotten lives. Hawthorne's Curiosities was a special case. The owner, a Mr. Alastair Hawthorne, had not passed away. He had, according to the lawyer's letter, simply walked out of his shop one Tuesday afternoon and vanished from the face of the earth. My job was to catalogue everything so the estate could be settled. The shop was a labyrinth of clutter. The air was thick with the scent of dust, old wood, and faded perfume. The only sound was the faint, constant ticking of dozens of unsynchronized clocks, a sound like a gentle metallic rain. For a week, I worked my way from the front of the shop to the back, documenting porcelain dolls with cracked faces, tarnished silver music boxes that no longer played, and books whose pages had turned to dust. Finally, I reached the last door, at the end of a short, dark hallway. It was locked, and a thick seal of dark red wax had been pressed over the keyhole. My instructions were clear. I was to catalogue everything. I broke the old, brittle seal with a letter opener. The key, a heavy, ornate iron thing, turned in the lock with a painful groan. The room inside was a stark contrast to the rest of the shop. It was empty, except for a single tall object standing in the center, covered by a heavy canvas dust sheet. The air in here was cold, still, and held none of the familiar, musty scent of the shop. It was sterile, preserved. I took a corner of the sheet and pulled. It was heavy, and fell to the floor with a soft, final sigh. Standing before me was a mannequin. It was a female figure, dressed in a beautiful but faded Victorian gown of dark silk. Its skin, a smooth, waxy material, had a disturbingly realistic sheen in the dim light. The hair was real human hair, a dark auburn, pinned up in an elegant old style. But it was the face that held me. The glass eyes were painted a deep, intelligent green, and they seemed to have an impossible depth. And the mouth was fixed in a faint, knowing, almost mocking smile, a lacquered smile. At its base, a small, tarnished brass plaque read a single word: Elise. I am a professional. I have seen strange and unsettling things in my career. I took a breath, noted the mannequin's details in my ledger, and tried to ignore the primal, instinctive feeling of unease that it gave me. I finished for the night, packed my tools, and stepped out into the cool evening air, locking the shop's main door behind me. As I walked down the empty street, I could not shake the feeling that from the deep, dark window of the shop, a pair of green glass eyes were watching me go. The next morning, I told myself I had been foolish. An old, dark shop can play tricks on the mind. The eyes in the window were a reflection, nothing more. I returned to my work, determined to be rational. I unlocked the back room, the air just as cold and still as before. I glanced at the mannequin, Elise, and a prickle of unease ran up my spine. Her head, it seemed to be tilted a fraction of an inch more to the left. Her lacquered smile now seemed aimed not at the door, but at the corner of the room. I must have bumped the platform yesterday, I muttered to the empty air, the sound of my own voice startlingly loud in the silence. I made a note and tried to ignore it. I spent the day in the main shop, the ticking of the clocks a steady companion, but my mind kept drifting back to the figure in the other room. As evening fell, I went to lock the back room door. I shone my lantern inside for one last check, and I froze. Her hand, her left hand, which had been resting flat against the silk of her dress, was now slightly turned. The palm faced slightly outwards, as if in a gesture of offering or invitation. I know, with the certainty of a careful man, that I had not touched her. A cold sweat broke out on my neck. I backed out of the room, locked the door, and left the shop without a second glance. The third day, I arrived with a plan, a test. My mind needed proof. I entered the back room, my heart pounding. Elise stood as I had left her, her hand still turned. I plucked a long single strand of thread from my own coat. Carefully, I laid it across both of her hands, which were clasped at her waist. A single dark line against the pale, waxy skin. I then took a photograph with my plate camera, the bright flash of magnesium powder, a violent intrusion in the silent room. I worked all day in a state of high anxiety, the clocks ticking like a countdown. At 5 o'clock, I took a deep breath and re-entered the room. The mannequin had not moved. My photograph confirmed it. Her hands were in the exact same position, but the thread was gone. It was not on her hands, it was on the floor, a good 3 feet away from the base of her platform, arranged in a neat, perfect circle. There was no draft in this sealed room. Nothing could have moved it, nothing natural. My skepticism shattered into a million pieces. This was real. Shaking, I abandoned my inventory and began to search Mr. Hawthorne's desk in the main office. Tucked into a hidden compartment at the back of a drawer, I found it, a small, leather-bound journal. The last few pages were filled with a shaky, terrified script. The final entry, dated the day before he vanished, was short. She likes gifts, pretty things. It keeps her still. But I have nothing left to give her. She is growing impatient. She wants something new to look at.
I sat there in the dusty office, the open journal in my trembling hands, for a very long time. The clocks on the wall, which had before sounded like gentle rain, now ticked with a heavy, menacing rhythm, like the slow counting of my final seconds. Every instinct, every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, to leave the key on the desk, walk out the door, and never ever look back. But I could not. A cold, heavy paralysis had settled over me. a strange sense of unfinished duty. Hawthorne had vanished before his work was done. I could not do the same. The thought was not my own. With leaden feet, I rose and walked back to the sealed room, back to her. My hand shook as I turned the iron key in the lock. The groan of the mechanism was the only sound in the world. I pushed the door open, holding my lantern high, and my heart stopped. She was not on her platform. She stood now in the very center of the room, a good 10 feet from where she should have been. Her head was tilted with a semblance of girlish curiosity, and her left hand, which had been empty, was now held out towards me. Resting in her pale, waxy palm was the single dark thread from my coat, still arranged in its neat, perfect circle. She was offering my gift back to me. I could not scream. I could not move. I could not breathe. I could only stare into her deep green glass eyes. And in their depths, for the first time, I saw it. A flicker. A spark of an ancient, patient, and terribly lonely consciousness. Her lacquered smile seemed to widen just a fraction. It was no longer mocking. It was a smile of welcome, of possession. The last thing I remember is the ticking of the clocks. For the first time since I had arrived, all of them, every single one, began to tick in perfect, absolute unison. A single, steady, final beat. The shop, Hawthorne's Curiosities, is quiet once more. The inventory is, for now, complete. And in the back room, the mannequin, Elise, is no longer impatient. She stands on her platform, perfectly still, her lacquered smile aimed at the corner. For now, she is content. She has something new to look at, and it will last her a very, very long time.
Now, we leave the cluttered shop and its patient watcher, and check in for a long shift at a place of faded luxury. A grand hotel with 400 empty rooms, but not all of them are silent. Our final tale tonight is The Graveyard Shift at the Grand Celestial Hotel.
The job was a dream, or so I thought. Night auditor at the Grand Celestial Hotel. The pay was decent, and the work was quiet. Most nights it was just me, from 11 p.m. until sunrise, alone in the vast, silent lobby. The Celestial was a relic from a grander time. Faded velvet chairs, a grand staircase that swept up into darkness, and the faint, lingering scent of a century of secrets. My instructions were simple. Stay at the desk, read my books, and answer the phone if it rang. It never did. There was only one guest in the entire 400-room hotel. A quiet, elderly woman who was a permanent resident in room 204. The other 10 floors were empty, decommissioned for the winter. Caverns of silent, empty rooms. The silence was the best part of the job. A deep, peaceful quiet that let me study. Until last night. It was just after 3 a.m. The only sound was the soft hum of the grandfather clock in the corner. Then, another sound cut through the silence. A sharp, jarring buzz from the old switchboard behind the desk.
My heart leapt into my throat. A call! A small, circular light was glowing on the switchboard, next to a room number. Room 913. That's not possible. The 9th floor is empty. The power is supposed to be shut off up there. I hesitated, then plugged in my headset and flipped the switch, my hand trembling slightly. "Front desk, this is Ben speaking." Silence. No, not silence. There was a sound on the other end, a faint, airy static, like the sound of wind blowing through a crack in a window frame, a high, thin whistling sound. "Hello?" I said again. "Is anyone there?" Only the whistling static. I disconnected the call, my mind racing. A wiring issue? An electrical fault? It had to be. I made a note in the maintenance log. Check phone line for room 913. Possible fault. I tried to return to my book, but I couldn't focus. The peaceful silence of the lobby was gone. It now felt heavy, watchful. I kept looking up from my desk at the grand, dark staircase and the silent golden doors of the elevator, half expecting someone or something to be standing there. I was alone in the lobby, but for the first time, I felt certain that I was not alone in the hotel.
The next night, I arrived for my shift with a knot of dread in my stomach. I told myself it was nothing, a crossed wire, a fluke. The hours ticked by, midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. The silence was perfect. I almost convinced myself I had imagined it all. And then, at 3:15 a.m., the switchboard buzzed. I looked at the glowing light, my blood running cold. It was not room 913. It was room 713, 2 floors closer. With a shaking hand, I answered the call. "Front desk?" The sound was different this time. The airy, whistling static was still there, but underneath it was something else, a faint, wet, whispering sound, like someone trying to speak through a mouthful of water. I could not understand the words, if they were words at all. It was a gurgling, desperate sound. I slammed the headset down, my heart pounding. The following night, I almost didn't come to work, but I needed the money. I told myself I would simply not answer the phone, but at 3:15 a.m., when the switchboard buzzed again, I couldn't stop myself. The light was glowing next to room 513, 5 floors closer. I answered. The gurgling whisper was louder now, almost like a word, almost like my name. I threw the headset across the desk and backed away, staring at the switchboard as if it were a coiled snake. And then I heard a new sound, a low, groaning rumble of old machinery coming to life. I looked across the vast, empty lobby to the grand elevator, its golden doors gleaming in the lamplight. The floor indicator above it, a brass arrow that had pointed at L for lobby since I started, began to move. It creaked upwards to 2, then 3. It climbed slowly, deliberately, all the way to the 12th floor. It stopped. I stood frozen behind the desk, watching. After a long, agonizing minute, the arrow began to move again, downwards. 11, 10, 9. It continued its slow, steady, and terrible descent, past the 5th floor where the last call had come from. 3, 2. It stopped on the 2nd floor, the floor of the only living guest, for a full minute, and then continued.
The arrow finally came to rest on L. A soft, clear ding echoed through the silent lobby. It was here. I stared at the closed golden doors, at the thin, dark line between them, waiting for them to open, my breath caught in my throat.
Time seemed to stretch and thin. I stood there, rooted to the spot, for what could have been a minute or an hour. My eyes were fixed on the thin, dark line between the golden doors. Then, with a soft, hydraulic hiss, the doors began to part. They slid open, revealing the elevator car within, the small, velvet-walled space lit by a single, dim, flickering bulb. And it was empty. Completely, perfectly empty. A wave of dizzying relief washed over me, so strong it made my knees weak. An electrical fault. A massive, terrifying, but perfectly logical electrical fault, that's all it was. I let out a shaky laugh. And in that exact moment, the switchboard buzzed again, loud and sharp in the quiet lobby. I turned, my heart seizing in my chest. The light was glowing next to a new number, a number I knew. Room 204, the room of Mrs. Gable, my only guest. I stumbled to the desk and put on the headset, my mind a storm of fear. "Mrs. Gable, are you all right?" First, there was the sound, that faint, gurgling whisper, closer and clearer than ever before. And then another voice, the calm, polite, reedy voice of the old woman herself. "Good evening, front desk. So sorry for the late hour. We are ready to check out now." We. The word echoed in the silent parts of my brain. I dropped the headset. My duty, my responsibility, it was the only thing that kept me from running out into the night. I had to check on her. I grabbed the master key and, ignoring the waiting elevator, I ran up the grand, dark staircase. My footsteps echoed in the vast, empty hotel. I reached the second floor, the hallway long and dark. The door to room 204 was at the very end, and it was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. The room was empty. The bed was perfectly made. On the bedside table, the telephone receiver was off the hook, lying on its side. And the window, the large window overlooking the rainy street, was wide open, the cold, wet wind blowing the curtains into the room. I walked to the window and looked down at the sill. There were 2 sets of wet tracks there. One was the clear, distinct print of a small, sensible shoe, Mrs. Gable's. The other was not a print. It was a long, thin, dark smudge of water, with no discernible shape, as if something with no feet had rested there for a moment before departing into the storm. And as I stood there, staring out into the rain, I heard it, faintly, from the lobby, 12 floors below, the buzzing of the switchboard. And I knew, with a certainty that was the last thing I would ever know, which light was glowing. The one for the front desk.